Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and I'm also the owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach all of your health goals at just about any body size. So if you are ready to let go of that toxic and shameful cycle of restrictions and fixation on food, body size, etc., and welcome a world of freedom where you are welcome to enjoy all of the foods that you love while still reaching all of your health and wellness goals, then give us a shout. Let us know how we can help you. Our website has all of our information as to where different offerings, different services, etc. And you're also welcome to book a free discovery call. That is a free 15-minute call. We just sit down, we chat, you tell me a little bit about what your goals are, and I tell you a little bit about the services that we offer, pricing of different options, and whether or not we are a right fit for you. So if you're ready to take the next step, then definitely check out the show notes. I will include a link to all of that good fun stuff there. And today I wanted to talk to you about something that I get a lot of questions about from my clients, and that is cravings, right? Cravings are very common, both certainly in the context of restrictions, so certainly in the context of dieting, but also just in life in general, right? And there's a couple of different reasons why we get cravings. I think very often cravings, unfortunately, are seen as something that's kind of a like a personal failing, right? Like you were just doing something wrong. It's a lack of willpower. You just can't get it together. Or even if you can, there's something that you have to kind of like white knuckle through. And unfortunately, none of those things are true, right? Cravings do have very real roots. We'll talk about those in just a second. But they also are not something to be white knuckled and just suffered through. We don't necessarily have to indulge every craving, but we do need to honor the fact that every craving is our body trying to tell us something. And because it's trying to tell us something, we would do well to listen. So, what I want to get into is kind of there's two to three main reasons for why we get cravings in the first place. And then I'll kind of as we talk through each of them, I'll talk about what we can do to help them. So the first is what I'm going to call like physiological or just kind of like biological needs for nutrients. So very often, and I see this all the time, particularly in people who are chronic dieters, they get cravings a lot of times in the evening hours. Now, you can get cravings at any time of day, but it is most common, at least in my practice, I see people who feel like they're doing good. And I say that in air quotes to those of you who are listening. Who feel like they're doing good all day long, or they feel like they're doing good throughout the work week, but then at night when they get home, like the wheels come off the wagon, or the weekend, like all of a sudden you feel a need to go crazy. That is likely because your diet or whatever you're doing during the workday or during the week is too restrictive. Just hard stop there. A lot of times people say like, oh, well, like I feel like, I'm just I crave carbs, or I get the munchies and things like that at night. Okay, did you eat enough carbs throughout the day? Did you eat enough protein throughout the day? More often than not, the answer is no. Right? So making sure that you are getting adequate calories and that those calories are spread out, that those calories come from a balance of protein, carbs, and fat, at all three meals. If you need help with that, we would be happy to help you. But what that looks like, there's really no ideal what that looks like. It's going to be different for everyone, but that is something that working with either myself or a dietitian in your area that maybe is covered by your insurance should be able to help you with. That is, number one is, are you getting enough nutrition? Because more often than not, I would say at least 50 to 60% of cravings are simply coming from we're not feeding our body enough food. Sometimes it's very obvious, like you're following a low carb diet and you start to crave carbs. Sometimes it's not that obvious. So sometimes our bodies kind of, they can tell us that we need something, but they can't always tell us exactly what we need. So a lot of times what they'll do is kind of cue a craving or cue hunger and hope that we eat the right thing. So it could be perhaps that, you just don't have enough vitamin B12. Well, your body can't tell you, hey, I need you to eat some type of fortified grain or a protein source or whatever. It's just like, hey, I'm hungry, and like kind of hopes that the B12 comes in with it. And then if the B12 doesn't come in with it, well, okay, we're going to keep cueing hunger until our needs are met. So I think the basics of having balanced nutrition and eating, spacing meals out throughout the day is probably the number one thing that I think cause most cravings, right? Is that people are not doing those things. They're not eating enough throughout the day. You should be eating at least whatever your calorie goals are. You should be eating at least half, if not 2/3 of it before you sit down to dinner. And I know many of us are very guilty of either like skipping breakfast, sometimes skipping lunch, eating very light meals at one or both of those, simply because we're busy, right? Those are working hours. Usually we have to get to work, we have to do things, we don't have a lot of time. Sometimes we feel that being good, quote unquote, is frankly we're not eating enough. So I think that that's something to unpack as well. But I think, more often than not, cravings result from the fact that we're just simply not eating enough. Maybe it's not enough of one particular thing. Sometimes it's not eating enough, period. So I generally recommend that everybody eat 3 meals a day. You can call those meals whatever you want. Typically try to space them out every 4 to 5 hours or so. So if you're somebody who, you just wake up and like breakfast is just a no for you, that's okay. But pay attention to what happens like 2 hours after you wake up. Like, are you hungry then, or could you tolerate food then? Breakfast doesn't have to be like first thing in the morning. It doesn't even have to be before you leave the house, depending on your work situation. Then 4 to 5 hours later, have something along the lines of lunch, and then 4 to 5 hours after that, have dinner. You absolutely have permission to eat snacks in between there as often as you need to, but making sure that nutrition gets in there, spaced out. And again, that those are good sized meals. I usually recommend having at least 1 serving of protein, 1 serving of carbs, and 1 serving of either a fruit or a vegetable per meal. So 3 meals, 3 food groups with each of those meals. The food group should be, somewhere between like 10 to 20 or 10 to 30 grams of protein, 30 grams of carbs or more, and somewhere in the ballpark, just a fruit or a vegetable serving. It could be anything. It could be an apple, it could be salad, it could be, carrots, whatever. That doesn't really matter. But at least, 10 to 15 grams of protein, preferably closer to 30 grams of protein, at least 30 grams of carbohydrates, preferably closer to 50 grams of carbohydrates with each meal. Okay. And then a fruit or vegetable as well. If you find that is still leaving you hungry, like later in the evening or kind of on alternating days or things like that, pay attention to what you're not eating. Are there certain food groups that you're eliminating? Are there certain food groups that you were kind of shy on that day? Like, for example, were you kind of light on protein for breakfast and lunch? Even if you eat dinner that has a good protein, well, maybe your body needs protein, right? So we get kind of a high protein snack instead of just kind of grabbing chips or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with chips, but if chips are not the thing that the nutrient that your body is craving, then it's not going to do any good to eat them. And I always will plug this too, is that your body needs more carbs than you think it does. Your brain alone needs 120 grams of carbs per day, every single day. Obviously, you can live without it, but if you're eating less than that, that is going to create some pretty serious cravings because you're not giving your body its primary source of fuel. So if your cravings tend to be for carbs, or if you tend to eat a low carb diet, stop it. Stop eating low carbs, eat carbs for breakfast and lunch, and see what happens to your cravings. Also, make sure you get a good source of protein and either a fruit or a vegetable with that meal, and then kind of see what happens. I promise you, more often than not, that in and of itself will fix the issue. The other issue, sometimes people are just simply following a low calorie diet that's too low for their needs. Um, I will die on this hill. Most Americans are not eating enough, even though we have this like quote unquote obesity epidemic. Um, most of us are not eating enough. And that creates cravings again once the busyness and the stress of the workday stops, or once the busyness and stress of the work week is over. Then all of a sudden we want to go buck wild. If that's what we're noticing, you're not eating enough, period, point blank, the end. Take it to the bank every time. That's what's happening. You're just not eating enough. If you're following like a 1200 calorie or even honestly a 1500 calorie diet, you're not eating enough, period. I don't care who you are. I don't care what size you are. I don't care what your goals are. If you're eating 1200 calories, even honestly 1500 calories, you're probably not eating enough, period. The end. Most adults, especially if they're active, need at least 1800 calories. Honestly, many need over 2000 calories. Again, that is something that I am happy to work with you to individually to figure out kind of what your individual needs are, or, any other like registered dietitian should be able to provide you with those numbers. A doctor, a nurse practitioner, a PA may be able to as well. But again, if they just give you like a 12, 15, or 1800 calorie diet and say like, here, this is probably right, ask them where they got that number. And if they don't have an answer other than like you're a man or a woman, then that's probably not the right number, and ask for a referral to see a nutritionist. Again, you're welcome to work with me, but I care more that you get the right information. So if there's like a dietitian in your area that takes your insurance and things like that, and it makes it more feasible, then by all means go to them. But I guarantee you they're not going to hand you a 1200 calorie diet, or if they do, walk out. Because that's just simply not enough. It's not enough food. So that's the main reason. That's honestly the fact that we're just not eating enough, or we're not eating enough of certain things, like we don't have enough balance. That is, I would say, at least 70% of the reason why people get cravings. So that's the big kahuna. So make sure we're getting enough calories, make sure we're getting enough protein, make sure we're getting enough carbs, and we're getting enough fat. Sometimes fitness trackers are helpful to track those things. If that's not safe for you, again, just check in with a professional. It should only take 1 or 2 appointments. Even if you have to pay cash, that shouldn't be more than like $200 out of your pocket. And it's worth it, right? It is worth it to stop this stupid cycle of, not eating enough, then eating way too much, and what that does to your psychology and your mental health. It's toxic, and you deserve better, even if it does cost money. So, like I said, I don't care if that money comes to my pocket. I care that you get the information. The second biggest reason why people have cravings is hormones. And I know when I say hormones, everybody thinks that, people who have uteruses and their periods. That is one reason why people tend to have cravings, but that's not the only hormone, and that's not the only reason, right? Very often cortisol, which is kind of like a stress hormone, can cause cravings. Cortisol is something that our body releases when it perceives a threat or stress. Now, that can be a psychological stressor, but biologically, humans evolved to most of our threats were actually physical. So there was, a neighboring tribe that was, creating havoc. There were wild animals that like we had to run away from. Most of our threats were actually physical in nature, and that's why cortisol has when it ramps up, it tends to create those needs for food, because it's anticipating some type of physical exertion to get away from a physical threat. Even though most of us anyway don't have a lot of physical threats in our life currently, cortisol is kind of non-distinct in that way. So it will tell your body, hey, there's a threat coming, we need to eat more so that we have the energy to get away from it. And while that's not particularly adaptive to how most of us live our lives now, because most of our stressors now typically are psychological, not physiological. Our physical safety is not always at the thing that's at risk. That our body doesn't know that, right? That's been a recent development in the whole course of human evolution. So cortisol is still going to sometimes create cravings. A lot of times those cravings are things that are high in calories. So things that are high fat, such as like fried food, fast food, etc. And things that are high in sugar. So like, sweets and things of that nature. Um, the way we help mitigate that, honestly, is to get rid of the cortisol. So if it is a psychological stressor, practicing some good stress management techniques, whatever that may be for you. It could be yoga, it could be meditation, but it can also be things like exercise. Exercise does a great job of burning off excess cortisol. If it's, navigating certain relationships or certain, things that are going on in your life, if it's consulting a therapist, honestly finding ways to deactivate that sympathetic nervous system and kind of get yourself back down to baseline. And like, sometimes we can't always get rid of the stressor of like what's causing us stress. So for example, if it's your job or a particular relationship that you maybe kind of have to navigate right now, we can still find ways to navigate the stress that is causing us. That is not particularly the topic of this podcast, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. However, if you want more information on it, I'm happy to do another episode about it. Again, if it's something that you want to talk to me about individually, I'm happy to talk to you about it. Even if it's not something I can fix, I can probably refer you to the appropriate resources of someone who can. What works to help navigate stress is just so different for everybody. And there's lots of options. But like I said, sometimes it's not just a matter of getting rid of the stress. Sometimes the stress is going to be there. So like, how do we make it impact our body less often? Right. When it comes to menstruation, there obviously are huge hormonal shifts that happen there. And some of that is just kind of cravings for cravings sake. Like women tend to, people with uteruses tend to create or tend to crave things like chocolate. Chocolate does contain some natural aphrodisiacs, so that's kind of the suspicion behind that. Other than that, a lot of people with uteruses say they just want more food, like they're just hungrier either kind of before, during, sometimes even right after their period. And that part is actually normal. That's not just hormonal swings, and it's not something you just kind of have to ride out. Your body is actually, like, if you think about what your uterus is doing in that time, it's creating this whole big nest that it then just sheds, right? So, kind of the same reason why people who are pregnant are hungrier is because they're growing a whole human body. I mean, you're doing some of that work, right? There's no like baby per se in the womb, but you're still doing a lot of work. Your body's using a lot of resources to build that nest that it's then going to shed. So a lot of times we do need more calories, right? A lot of times we do need more. Some people tend to crave things like, beef or spinach or things that are high in iron because you are losing a lot of iron because you're shedding, you're bleeding. So I think it's important to just understand what all your body is going through during that time. And it's not just something that is, minuscule or minor, or that you should just have to kind of tough it through. Like, periods are really fucking hard. And if you've ever lived through one, that. And your nutrition needs, frankly, are a lot higher. Like, you can, over the course of a period, you can lose 1,000 calories. So, I mean, that's a lot of calories if you consider that in like a 3 or 4 day span. Like, that's more than most workouts are gonna lose in a day. So it makes sense that you're hungrier, right? Some people are hungrier kind of the week before because like their body's kind of building it up. Some people are hungrier during the actual shedding, and some people are kind of hungrier after the week after the shedding has happened. So it can really run the gambit, right? But most people have a pattern kind of within themselves, if that makes sense. So if you're kind of somebody who tends to get hungry the week before your period, you kind of will always tend to get hungry the week before your period. Similar, if you're somebody who gets hungry either during or after your period, it will probably be one of those 2 weeks rather regularly for yourself. And so, but again, that's not something that needs to be like white knuckled through or disregarded. Your body is telling you something. It's like, hey, we're hungry here because we're losing a lot of resources. So listen to it. Again, the nutrients that tend to be lost are definitely protein, as well as iron. And then in some cases, it's just plain calories. And really anything. So sometimes, sweets are a good quick source of calories. So that's also potentially why those tend to be a thing of craving. Similar to the cortisol, right? It's like things that are high fat, things that are high in sugar. Those things are good. Your body knows that those are things that are good, reliable sources of really quick calories. So though that might be the things that you kind of notice. And again, it's okay to eat them during those times. It's perfectly okay to eat them. Don't feel like you have to let it go. The other major hormone that I want to talk about is insulin. And whether you are insulin resistant or diabetic, if your insulin is not responding appropriately. So I guess I'll back up and talk about what insulin does. So when we eat, our blood sugar tends to rise, and so our body has digested our food, and through our digestive system, the nutrients that we eat, including carbs and sugar, are absorbed through our intestinal tract directly into our bloodstream. Once that happens, there is a noticeable rise in our blood sugar as a result of the fact that we ate and those nutrients have been broken down and then absorbed into our bloodstream. That's not where they go. The bloodstream is meant to be kind of this highway of how to deliver things from A to B. So our bloodstream delivers them quite literally from our digestive tract to wherever we need them. That can be various organs and tissues in the body. Probably the biggest energy sink for most of us is our muscles. And that doesn't necessarily mean like, yes, if you work out, obviously your muscles are a big energy sink, but even if you don't, your muscles take a lot of energy throughout the day, just through normal movement. So what happens is, okay, we have a rise in blood sugar. We have a rise in everything, but blood sugar is the one that tends to be problematic. That blood sugar then tries to get into, say, for example, our muscle cells, but it can't without a carrier protein, and that protein is insulin. So insulin basically kind of goes along with the blood sugar and kind of opens the door, if you will, into the muscle cell, so that it can then those sugar can fly into the muscle cell, and the muscle cell can use it for fuel to do all the things that it does. And that applies to any cell type, right? It could be your liver cell, a heart cell, a lung cell, it doesn't matter. Muscles are just kind of the most common. So what happens in the case of insulin resistance and even type 2 diabetes is your body in some cases doesn't produce enough insulin, but far and away what's more common is that it produces enough insulin, just the insulin is not very efficient at opening that door. So even though you have insulin and you have sugar, the insulin can't open the cell door for the sugar to get into it. So basically what those cells, so your muscle cells, your heart cells, your liver cells, whatever, are in need of fuel, but they don't have a way to access it, even though you're eating it. And that's what can cause your blood sugar then to rise, because the sugar is staying in your bloodstream rather than going where it's supposed to, which is, the cells that need it, whether it's, muscle or heart or liver or whatever. So what happens very often is because those cells are hungry, they don't have the energy they need, they're going to cue hunger. And a lot of times, because it's a very specific nutrient deficiency, the pathways that govern whether or not those cells get fat or get protein are working fine. So they don't necessarily need more fat or protein. What they need is more glucose. So a lot of times they will actually send cues for you to eat more glucose. So people, a lot of times when their blood sugar is not well controlled, or they're dealing with insulin resistance and don't know it, they will get really intense sugar cravings. And they're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, my body has too much sugar. How does this work? It's like, yes, your body has it, but it's not using it very effectively. So that's a lot of times, and there's lots of pharmacological medications on the market. Again, that's not the point of this particular podcast episode, but to point out that, like, a lot of times, like, regulating that insulin pathway is what ultimately will solve those sugar cravings. So it'll bring your blood sugar down because it's going to get the sugar into the cell, which is where it goes. So that's just kind of note. It's actually not uncommon if you are insulin resistant, pre-diabetic, or have type 2 diabetes. If your blood sugar is not well managed, then a lot of times sugar cravings are actually really common. And then the last reason why, so we talked about biological or physiological reasons, we talked about hormonal reasons. And then the last reason is just, sometimes you just want a hankering for something because it sounds good and it tastes good. And I think so often, this diet and wellness industry has really done a great job of teaching us that we should not eat for pleasure, that food is just meant to be fuel for our bodies and that's it. And that eating for pleasure is gluttonous and sinful and will make us fat. And then we will be like immoral or somehow lesser people because we're fat. And the reality is food affects your dopamine system. Food affects your serotonin. Those two things very highly impact your mood. And there's a feedback loop, right? Like food isn't designed physiologically to be a pleasurable process, just like sex, just like cocaine, just like, and any other pleasurable experience, right? So while cocaine may have like adverse effects, or even any illicit drugs may have illicit effects or adverse effects rather on your body, that's why we don't want to use them. But that circuitry is there in all of us, and it's meant to be pleasurable. And you look back at the human history and human evolution, food is a very vital part of every celebration. It's a very vital part of emotional times. And the fact that we have somehow uncoupled food from pleasure in society, frankly, is worrisome, because food is meant to be pleasurable and our body craves that pleasurable sensation, even if our nutrient needs are met. So I think it's really important to kind of pay attention to, if you're eating chicken and broccoli and brown rice every single day and you're bored and it doesn't nourish you and it doesn't feel good, that makes sense, because there's probably not a lot of pleasure in those foods, because the foods that evokes the most pleasure are foods that are high in fat and foods that are high in sugar. What is the trend we have noticed here, right? We have noticed that foods that are high in fat and high in sugar are what our body is physiologically designed to crave. One, because the theory is because they are also nutrient dense. And by nutrient dense, I mean they're high in fat and they're high in carbs. Those are nutrients. Do they have a lot of micronutrients? No, probably not, but they have a lot of calories. And that's ultimately, when you think of your body as a vessel of survival, is what our bodies are after, right? So I think it's also important to recognize that, like, it is okay to eat for pleasure. It is okay to eat something just because you want to, even if your goal is weight loss, right? What good is white knuckling that craving going to do? It's just going to intensify it. Whereas if you indulge it, even if it's like in a more moderate way, then the craving is going to go away. Right. And a lot of times just kind of this pleasure aspect may also relate to hormonal reasons. It may relate to physiological reasons. We don't have a great grasp on that as of present, simply because we haven't studied it, because the medical and research fields are just so highly biased against, weight gain and fatness and gluttony and kind of all of the things that go along with that. And we're really doing ourselves a disservice because we don't understand something that, frankly, we should. But we do know that bodies do eat for pleasure too. And that is okay, right? Like, one cookie, one donut, one whatever is not going to completely derail your progress towards your goals, number one. And it is also not going to kill you, right? So I think those are kind of important things to keep in mind as well. So we have very real biological reasons or physiological reasons for needing different things. Sometimes that comes from a lack of balance in our diet, or just simply not eating enough. We also can have hormonal things such as cortisol, menstrual cycles, and insulin that can impact our need or our desire for food. And then of course we have our brain that is cueing for pleasure as well. So if you have more questions about any of that, I would love to talk to you all more. I would love to hear what thoughts you have about it. And then, of course, if we want to, this spurs more content or more questions about other episodes, I'm happy to provide those as well. So that is all I have for you today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and please go eat something that you enjoy and make sure you are eating enough. Stay nourished.